Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping straight into a really fascinating piece of recent political commentary that tackles a huge shift currently happening in American politics. Specifically, we're unpacking a source that analyzes a recent Democratic Socialist primary win in Colorado, and more importantly, the broader demographic and ideological shifts that this one victory represents. Now, our goal today isn't to take sides. We're just here to map out the arguments and the data presented in this commentary so we can really understand the mechanics of this emerging political movement. Let's get into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 5 core areas. First, a socialist primary victory. Second, the Tea Party comparison. Third, factory to faculty lounge. Fourth, what the polls say. And finally, the Democratic divide.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, a socialist primary victory, which really serves as the inciting incident for this whole analysis. So the source starts by zeroing in on a recent Democratic primary win out in Colorado by a candidate who proudly claims the Democratic Socialist label. Upon winning, this candidate made a pretty striking declaration. They said, "We're taking our system back, and we're taking our country back." The commentator really hones in on this specific phrasing, asking a super pointed question. What does taking it back actually mean here? I mean, if the explicit goal is to move away from capitalism, which has literally been the foundational economic system of the country, the source argues you aren't really taking the system back to anything historical. You're actually attempting to replace it completely. And this perfectly captures the ideological friction the commentator is pointing out. Modern socialist politicians are arguing that they understand economics just as well as capitalists do, and that they're going to solve years of economic mismanagement using socialist principles. But to counter this, the source brings up a famous quote from the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, who said, "If socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialist." It's a sharp contrast. The commentator uses this quote to highlight their view that historical socialist experiments have pretty consistently failed, contrasting the fresh optimism of these new politicians with a deep skepticism rooted in classical economic theory. Moving right along to Section 2, the Tea Party comparison, we're looking at restorative movements versus entirely new ones. You've probably heard a lot of political analysts calling this new wave of democratic socialism the Tea Party of the left. Well, the commentator pushes back on that idea hard, arguing that we haven't actually seen this movie before. They note that the Tea Party was fundamentally a restorative movement. Think about it. Supporters were carrying pocket constitutions, asking America to return to traditional limits. They weren't out there demanding that Washington seize entire industries or redistribute wealth. They were asking for less government intervention and a lower national debt. So whether you agreed with them or not, their core argument was about going backward to an older framework. The crucial takeaway here is that the source views these two movements as complete opposites, not mirror images. The Tea Party's entire ethos was aimed at shrinking the government, lowering debt, and imposing limits. On the flip side, modern democratic socialists, according to the source, believe the government should regulate more, spend more, own more, forgive more, and guarantee more. The commentator really emphasizes that confusing these two totally opposite trajectories is a major analytical mistake. Which brings us to Section 3. Factory to faculty lounge. This is all about a massive demographic shift happening within the movement. Historically speaking, socialist movements claim to represent the working class. Karl Marx literally predicted a revolution springing up right from the factory floor, from the industrial blue-collar workers. But today's reality? The source argues it's quite different. The energy today comes almost entirely from elite university graduates, prestigious media outlets, nonprofits, government bureaucracy, and professional advocates. As the analysis smartly notes, the movement has shifted from the factory floor straight to the faculty lounge. It's now largely driven by the commanding heights of culture, rather than the everyday blue-collar workforce. All right, let's pivot from political theory to some hard numbers in Section 4, what the polls say. We're going to dig into some Gallup data to see how the public is actually reacting to all of this. The source poses this exact, pivotal question. Will the average Democrat actually buy this? Will the everyday voter embrace this new faculty lounge socialism? It's a great setup to look at what recent polling tells us about American economic preferences. And honestly, the numbers the source brings up are incredibly revealing. Check out this baseline data. The commentator highlights that despite all the intense political noise, and the massive media attention given to socialist candidates, Gallup finds that Americans still view capitalism significantly more favorably than socialism. Capitalism is sitting at a 54% favorability rating compared to just 39% for socialism. But here's where it gets really fascinating. The commentator points out that if you simply change the language used in the polling, the results skyrocket.
If you take the word capitalism completely out of the equation and just ask Americans if they support small businesses, an overwhelming 95% of Americans have a positive view. 95%. And on top of that, 81% say free enterprise is a good thing. The source emphasizes that when it comes to this stuff, language matters immensely. Looking at those massive polling gaps, the commentator notes a really key distinction. The anger in the country is not directed at your local hardware store, it's directed at concentrated corporate power. The public's frustration, according to this analysis, isn't with a fundamental concept of the free market or the ability to go out and start a business. They absolutely love small business. Their frustration is specifically aimed at massive, concentrated corporate entities that just feel totally unaccountable. And that leads us to our final stop, Section 5, the Democratic Divide, where we examine this growing tension between revolution and relief. The source maps out a deep, structural split inside the political left right now. On one hand, you have the activist class, that faculty lounge demographic we talked about earlier. According to the source, this group is dreaming about nationalizing industries, radically restructuring society, and sparking a total systemic revolution. But on the other hand, you have the average voter. And they aren't looking for a sweeping revolution at all. They are desperately seeking relief. They just want politicians who will listen to them and offer some practical, immediate economic help. Because let's be real, what actually occupies the mind of the everyday voter? The analysis says it's grounded, practical concerns: buying groceries, making rent, paying for childcare. These are immediate kitchen table survival issues. The commentator argues that these tangible concerns clash heavily with the grand ideological goals being pushed by the elite activist class. The average voter isn't sitting around pondering abstract economic theory. They're looking at their bank account. And the source uses this highly relatable, slightly humorous hypothetical quote to just perfectly summarize the average citizen's mindset amidst all this grand political restructuring. While the activists are shouting about entirely new economic systems, the average voter is looking at their supermarket receipt thinking, "What? I just want my eggs to come down in price." It really highlights the total disconnect between the academic theory of the new socialist movement and the grounded, day-to-day reality of the electorate. So as we wrap up our analysis of this source material, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative question to chew on. Can a modern political party actually successfully balance the sweeping systemic revolution demanded by its highly educated activists with the everyday voter's desperate need for affordable groceries and rent? It's a really profound tension, this pull between revolution and relief, and it is undoubtedly going to shape the landscape of our upcoming elections. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these ideas today, and always keep questioning what you see on the political horizon.